In today's episode, I want to share with you a 5-minute exercise on metacognition revealed by neuroscientists in this book called Tiny Experiments that I immediately put to use, found some useful benefits right off the bat, and found it important enough to just do an episode solely on this chapter. By the way, welcome to the Habit Chess podcast. On this show, I like to talk about training the strength and conditioning of skills so that we can learn new things faster. So metacognition and being able to understand how we think and having a process for doing so is something that I'm increasingly finding more valuable, especially when so much of our thinking can be automated or hijacked or dysregulated at any moment, right? There's just way more stimuli out there than there has been historically. And so this tool proves to be more and more useful by the day. So anyways, the chapter that I'm going to be breaking down with you is actually chapter 7, where it is talking about creating growth loops. Part of the idea here is this cycle of trial, error, and growth. And putting yourself through these tiny experiments where you have room to actually experience a little bit of error, and then also having a process to learn from those errors. I thought this was a great point because one of the things that you think about is, when is the last time that somebody points out your errors in a way that you can learn from? Maybe when we were in school, when you're objectively being graded, maybe in performance reviews, but even so, when you get that type of feedback, right? It can feel personal. You might not even be willing to listen to it for learning from our errors because, in previous books, episodes, and research that we've covered on this show, we know that experiencing struggle is critical to learning, more than just perfect repetition of something that you're already good at. Experiencing some level of difficulty and being able to engineer that. That's kind of this idea of strength and conditioning, applying that to this skill that we think is worth getting good at. And so the error part allows you to, one, become aware of what adjustments do I need to make? What could I do next? But often this can feel kind of daunting. And also, if you look at it from like a to-do list standpoint, I found this very useful because part of it is getting to kind of analyze what was done today, not just what I'm going to do, what I plan to do, but what was done today. And I found that this frames it with language that was actually, it doesn't make you go, oh, there's so much more to do, missed out on this. It kind of allows you to look at it a little more clinically. And again, creating kind of this personal lab where you can run experiments with tiny things throughout the day. It can be as little as, for me, one of the things when I put myself through this exercise was working out, right? And being able to go through each of these straight stages, like, okay, what time did I work out? Did that feel better or worse than maybe working out at a different time of day? I know that sounds very small, but it's like figuring out these kinds of variables and understanding how we tick and how we perform best is a huge, huge leverage point if you can do that with yourself. And so let's dive in, because this exercise starts with that trial and error cycle that is very important. And it will make sense now that I kind of dive into this next part, which is how our ancestors' daily routines included organic opportunities to shape their inner world on long walks, in meditative moments, while completing repetitive tasks such as sewing and tending to crops, or in nightly reflection when praying before bed. We in the present day have largely lost those quiet, natural pauses. Instead, we grind on a near constant flood of social media and emails. This leaves little space for thinking, let alone thinking about thinking. And so basically, it goes into how kind of disconnected you can get from yourself when you don't do this. And of course, this can have a cascade of effects, but let's just focus on practical, like day-to-day satisfaction and maybe fulfillment in the things that you are already doing. I find that this process allows you to, again, turn your life into a bit of a lab. And I don't know, I've always kind of looked at my training that way. And when I had a large roster of 60, 70, fitness coaching clients, I would also look at that as kind of a lab. Certain assessments I would give everybody, certain tests that I would do, and gather data. Hey, how did 60 to 70 different people perform across this? I find that kind of stuff fascinating. So anyways, the thing that we're going to talk about now is metacognition. Now, this is a term that I heard years ago from another clinical psychologist, and I heard it in the form of metaprocessing. And it was just this idea of kind of calling out and verbalizing something that you are thinking. And it could be, verbalizing it when you're speaking it. It could be writing it down, but it is this idea of kind of getting in touch with the processing that's going on in your brain and giving language to it. And it immediately, reminded me of that. I'm not sure if those are two different complete terms, but metacognition actually, resonates for this situation a little better. How do we dedicate space to thinking about how we think so we can improve and use our thoughts for our situation, not against our situation. So the author talks about how this is one of the most popular modules that she teaches at Nest Labs, and it is basically an exercise designed to be able to incorporate metacognition and train it on a day-to-day basis in 5 minutes or less. So the tool is called Plus Minus Next, and it's 3 columns, right? And so in the plus columns, you have positive observations that go there about your day. And then you have negative observations that go in the minus column. And then you have plans for what's next in the last column. And so basically, if you've ever filled out like a daily reflection journal, or you have an app that asks you a couple questions to be able to keep track of those things, this reminds me of a variation of that, but a more effective and purposeful variation of that. So let's dive into the first part, which is basically the plus, right? And so here you're going to write down any accomplishments that made you proud. These could be largely work-based, but don't neglect other areas of your life, such as relationships, hobbies, and home life. Your achievements can be big or small, such as completing a project at work or learning a new skill, or small daily victories, such as maintaining a consistent exercise routine. Now, this is really important to highlight because it's not just about professional stuff or just work. This is why I said it feels like you're turning your life into a lab, because you are looking at how all of the other compounds of your life interact, and it gives you space to kind of do that, and when can you think of the last time maybe you carved out some time to do that? Maybe meditation, but as she mentioned earlier in this chapter, there's less and less of that empty idle time that's not filled up with some other stimuli. And so being able to dedicate these 5 minutes for this, even just the positive stuff, can be really good. Because if you look at a traditional to-do list, it's one of those things where me personally, I will write way more to-dos than I know I can fit probably that day. I don't know why I still do it, but I do. And no matter how much you do, there's still items that are left unchecked or things that didn't go according to plan. And so instead of in a negative way being like, oh, didn't do this today, are we going to do it tomorrow, or anything that would kind of mess with that thinking, I think it's really smart to frame it in this way, right? So you have the positive thing that you noticed, which for me, in this case, I mentioned like working out was something that I put, and working out earlier in the day. So that was something I specifically put in the plus section. Now in the minus column, it doesn't actually have to be for exactly the same thing. So if, I'm talking about working out earlier in the day, the minus doesn't have to be a negative observation about that exact thing. It could be about other stuff, but I do find it helpful, and it's kind of addicting to play this game to see if you can carry this thing that you're thinking about through across all 3 columns. So working out earlier in the day was plus, right? Felt really great about myself. The minus was, okay, it did take away an hour or delay an hour for some of the deeper work that I wanted to do, for example. The next column is really combining insights from the plus and minus column. So, okay, I worked out earlier in the day, felt really good. That's a plus, but it delayed my deep work by an hour. And the next would be the insight that I have, which was, okay, maybe I can do the deep work even earlier or before the workout, right? Or I could do the workout 1 hour earlier. And so even though that sounds so small, that's the point, tiny experiments, right? You have this little thing that you can try next session tomorrow. Within 24 hours, you can give this thing a shot, and you can treat every single thing that you did or that you thought about that way until you can't really think of much more. Like I said, put a 5-minute timer on. I think that's a great way to do it, so you don't find it taking up too much of your time. But you'll notice it's pretty fun, especially the positive column, the plus column. That's definitely, I think, more enjoyable. But then I think the more important one is definitely the minus, because, you don't really get a chance to verbalize, okay, what didn't I like? What didn't work? As you can see, at the same time, plus minus next is kind of simplistic enough where it's not giving you anything like, oh, you're ranking your achievements, you're judging yourself based on this or that. There's no like subjective emotional feel to this, even though you are kind of getting in touch with how you do feel, and positive and negative, it doesn't feel as charged. I think there are many productivity systems or reflection systems that can feel like, okay, how is this connected? How is this kind of playing together? And this really combines it together, because that next column is really important. You see a bunch of tiny experiments that you could be running in the next day. And so here's an example. This is in the plus column. The constant joy I felt whenever I thought about where I'm at now, my partner, and the new friend I made. So see how that is very focused on, okay, it's not just a objective thing. Hey, I knocked out this task. You will have many of those. I mean, I find myself listing many of those, like, yeah, I'm so glad I got this thing done, that thing done. But it gives you some space to actually think beyond that, right? Think beyond certain things that made you actually feel good, made you actually feel like you were gaining momentum, right? Those things I find we can be completely disconnected from until you're forced to actually look at it in some way. And usually it's not in great situations, right? It's like you have these realizations after a big life transition, or, you lose your job or something like that. And so being able to start actually getting in touch with what things am I good at? What things do I like? What things energize me? What things drain me? I think that is worth it alone to run a series of tiny experiments for yourself. And what's cool is that you could do this daily. I definitely am, or I'm trying to, but I think that you can also do this every couple days or weekly. And what's cool is because it's kind of a templatized format, you can go back and look at previous tables. Like I do mine in my, Notion time tracking template. It's just a new sheet that I create a table inside there. And then, it's something that I can go revisit when I want to see how the metacognition exercise went, maybe the last time that I did it. I love this section right here. Plus minus next is a powerful way to inject metacognition into your daily life and work. It isn't about making big changes, crafting 5-year plans, or finding your purpose. Instead, it focuses on incremental adjustments that compound over time. You can identify what you want more of and proactively focus your attention on these sources of growth. Equally, a difficult interaction can become an opportunity to define your preferred communication style. A failed project launch can offer insights into team dynamics. A double-booked appointment can make you wonder about your current workload. And then it goes on to this part about making good mistakes. And, I've said this before, of making survivable mistakes, but I think this is great because it's referencing Leonardo da Vinci and how messy and iterative his process was. People didn't realize that, and still to this day don't really think about that. I certainly didn't, but it was saying how like his drawings were covered in like smear marks and all this stuff, and every version of it that he had, no matter how terrible it was, he like actually held on to that stuff. It says how scholars have described how he would start sketching ideas without a full understanding of how they work, using the mistakes he discovered to propel his thinking forward. I do also find that there's this benefit of control. You feel like you have a little more control over your day, over your life, over your thoughts, in a world where there's not much of that, right? And so having a healthy sense of control is something that this kind of gives you. If it gives you a aerial view of, I think, your life in a way that isn't just this deep, reflective, like ikigai exercise where this might take weeks for me to uncover what my life's purpose is, right? This is something you can begin with no matter what you do and how much you know about yourself or not yet. And I love this part where she talks about, because we seldom bring those errors to conscious awareness, we miss the opportunity to grow from them. Change is unintentional. Adaptation is accidental, but there's so much to learn from our mistakes. We should learn to fall in love with them. Fundamentally, plus minus next is a tool for making good mistakes. And then a little later in the paragraph, only through combined action and reflection can we achieve meaningful growth. Trial and error create a feedback loop of guaranteed learning, a successful cycle of experimentation. So again, of course, on the show, we pay attention to anything that contributes to faster, guaranteed, or more effective learning. And this is a simple tool that you can do every day, 5 minutes or less, that allows you to do that. I even found it super exciting for stuff I was learning. So when I read, I went through a couple different books and was kind of doing some research. And then there was an exercise that I stumbled upon in one of the books, and I decided to actually put myself through it. And so that was something that I was excited about. And it created this room for experimentation, right? Which in the next column, I was able to put, this is how I plan to implement this. This is how I plan to take this exercise and put it into play. And it just seems like a funner way of also coming up with a priority list or a to-do list, because you're getting to trace all of these things and look at it from look at 3 columns at once versus just, what do I need to do? And is it a priority? Is it urgent? Is it not? This gives you a more connected way of seeing all the things that you're doing beyond just zoomed in on that day, that week. It gives you a moment to see how big tasks and goals are made up of many subtasks, right? And how you can go about breaking these things down into little chunks and processes, because that is ultimately, when we look at really complex skills that people are great at, they have the ability to deconstruct it and train it. Train the strength and conditioning to get better at the core skill that they want to express. And so I love this closing to the chapter where it says, by combining your pact with a metacognitive practice, you've now created your own life laboratory, equipped with everything you need to learn through deliberate action and reflection, an approach based on experimenting, assessing what worked, what didn't, and what to change next. I also find that there is this suppression of the ego almost when you are, not so focused on proving yourself right, or you're looking at it from a scientific view or a scientist's perspective, which is ultimately, I don't know, right? But let's find out. I'm curious enough to find out and run this experiment, or even dedicate the time to thinking about this experiment or planning it. And for some reason, it feels like, one, you can get to the truth a lot easier and you can act on it, a lot more effectively, instead of taking the expert's approach of, I have it all figured out, let me make sure that I do, right? Let me affirm what I'm already thinking. It kind of trains you to be curious, if about nothing else than yourself. And I think that that is a pretty worthwhile skill to train. So make sure to drop a comment. Let me know what you thought of this. Make sure to check out the link to the book and get the full thing. Reach out to hi@habitchess.com if you enjoyed the show. I always love getting in touch with people who listen. And so I appreciate you hanging out and taking the time. See you on the next one.